One morning, I walked outside just wanting to cast a line into the lake behind my house, and within weeks I was branded a criminal accused of destroying the environment and threatened with losing the very land I'd bought with my own money. My tackle shop started losing customers. Neighbors turned their backs on me, and all because of one woman flashing a fake badge she dug out of some drawer. If you've ever seen someone try to run a neighborhood like a personal kingdom, then you'll know exactly the kind of storm I was about to face. I should back up. My name's Daniel Harris. I own a small tackle shop in town, and a few months ago I bought a piece of land at a county auction. It came with a lake, or at least I thought it was just access to the lake. That place meant more to me than real estate. It was my sanctuary. My dad taught me to fish on mornings like these before the cancer took him, and after my wife passed a few years back, I couldn't breathe in the city anymore. Too much noise, too many ghosts. This lake was peace. It was the only place that let me heal. So picture this, 6:30 in the morning. Rod in hand, the mist still rising off the water, when a woman I'd never seen before plants herself in my driveway. Heather Collins. Blazer clipboard hugged to her chest like she's guarding state secrets and a scratched plastic badge pinned to her lapel. She blocks my way like she's the sheriff of the lake. "Excuse me, sir," she says, "I'm Heather Collins, president of the Lakeside Homeowners Association, and I need to inform you this is private property." I looked at that badge corner's bent ink faded and realized the thing expired 2 years ago. I told her so. She snatched it back like I'd insulted her grandmother, then started scribbling furious notes on her clipboard citing me for unauthorized lake access. She even ripped out a carbon copy citation and tried to hand it to me. I didn't take it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Something told me this was about to get ridiculous, and ridiculous it got. 10 minutes later, a tow truck and a locksmith roll up because Heather claimed my car was blocking an emergency HOA access route. The drivers took one look, saw me point at the property stakes, clearly marking my land, and left shaking their heads. But Heather wasn't done. Oh no. She stormed off, promising to bring it up at the community meeting. That's when I started noticing the neighbors. Sophie Clark down the street gave me this sympathetic shrug from her porch like, yeah, we all know she's crazy. But George Miller across the way stood there with his arms crossed, nodding along with every word Heather said. George is the kind of guy who probably measures his lawn with a ruler, and Heather's fake rules were music to his ears. By the next week, I had fake notices taped to my door threats of fines, whispers about liens on my land. And when I walked into my shop, 3 regulars walked out because Heather had been calling around saying I was under environmental investigation. She wasn't just attacking my peace, she was attacking my livelihood. Every canceled order hit me like a punch in the gut. That's when the doubt set in. I sat by the water one evening, rod in my hands but no will to cast, and thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should just pay the $50, call it a membership fee, and stop the bleeding. I hated myself for even thinking it, but the pressure was brutal. Neighbors avoided me. Customers stopped calling. Even Sophie, who used to wave every morning, barely made eye contact. Alone, beaten down, I wondered if I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. Then came the twist. My old friend Mark Lewis, a real estate attorney, called after seeing Heather's posts online. "Daniel," he said, "you realize you didn't just buy access rights, right? You own the whole parcel, including the lake." My jaw hit the floor. He walked me through the deed, the survey, the auction documents. Every line said the same thing. The lake was mine outright. Heather had no authority at all. That revelation lit a fire under me. Suddenly, the harassment looked different. It wasn't some HOA mix-up, it was a con. And Sophie Blesser handed me receipts she'd kept lake fund payments supposedly for conservation, all routed to a landscaping company owned by George Miller's brother-in-law. And where had that money gone? Straight into Heather's backyard in the form of a brand new sprinkler system and imported plants. I started installing cameras around my property. What they caught was damning county vehicles unloading restoration materials that wound up decorating Heather's garden after dark. The night of the community meeting, Heather set the stage like it was a courtroom. Projector charts folders spread across a table. She pointed at me in front of 30 neighbors and called me a violator, a trespasser, an environmental threat. Photos of trash and burned fire rings filled the screen. My heart was hammering, but I stood up. "When were those photos taken?" I asked. She stumbled, muttered about metadata. That's when I plugged in my own phone and showed receipts from the so-called lake fund being used to pay Miller Landscaping for Heather's yard. The room went dead silent. George's face drained of color. Sophie shook her head in disbelief. I could feel the shift the moment the crowd realized Heather's authority was nothing more than smoke. She sputtered about stewardship, but the spell was broken. "I wish I could tell you that ended it. It didn't." Heather came back swinging this time with environmental barricades. One morning, I woke up to orange fencing and signs declaring Habitat Protection Zone, no trespassing. She even produced papers stamped with county seals claiming biologists were assessing the area. To the neighbors, it looked official. To me, it looked like checkmate. And it worked. Customers fled my shop. Sophie stopped coming by. George strutted around like the HOA had finally nailed me. I sat in my truck one night staring at those barricades, wondering if I'd lost. Maybe I should have let it go. Maybe peace meant surrender. But then Sophie slid into the booth at the coffee shop, nervous eyes darting. She whispered, "I found more receipts, 5 years of them. Heather's been bleeding this neighborhood dry. And look at these." She showed me texts between Heather and her contractors laughing about milking the environmental angle until he caves. That was the nail in the coffin. So I took everything. Deeds, receipts, surveillance footage to a county hearing. Heather showed up with a lawyer and her cronies, but the commissioners weren't playing games. I laid out the deed first. Clear as day, the lake, the water rights, the buffer zone, it all belonged to me. Then the money trail every dime. Neighbors had paid supposedly for conservation diverted into Heather's property. $18,000 in 4 years. And finally the bombshell, there was no legal lakeside HOA. Never filed, never incorporated, pure fiction. The commissioners turned to Heather. "Do you have any documents proving your authority?" She stammered about consensus, about community trust, but had nothing. I watched the collapse in her eyes the moment she realized the curtain had been ripped down. The ruling was brutal and beautiful. Restitution of every dollar collected plus fines pushing the total over 20 grand. Banned from holding any community office for 5 years. 200 hours of mandatory service at my lake. And every fake HOA sign she'd installed had to come down by her own hands under county supervision. The next morning, I stood in my driveway with my camera rolling as Heather sweated through her blazer wrench in hand, unscrewing the bolts on a HOA access restricted sign. Every clank of metal on concrete felt like justice. She muttered excuses, tried to play the victim, but nobody was listening anymore. Neighbors who once sneered at me now whispered apologies. George kept his head down. Sophie finally smiled again. And me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't throw a party. I just watched the woman who tried to steal my peace dismantle the empire of lies she'd built bolt by bolt. The lesson, power built on nothing collapses the second you shine a light on it.